if somebody were to tell you 5 years ago that you could reverse aging, people would laugh at you. But today there are billions.
You know, you're seen as someone who's superhuman. You're able to do incredible things on stage, off stage. You have a phenomenal physical, mental, psychological presence. You have a beautiful spiritual presence. But at the same time, you talk about in this book being 31 years old and finding out about this brain tumor.
Yes.
I want to hear about what that feels like when you think you're doing everything right for your health.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been a point of concern. And all of a sudden, you get this news. How does that feel?
Well, it was scary, obviously. Actually, it started a little sooner than that. When I was really young, I grew up really rapidly. I'd worked 20-hour days, and I was also blessed. And I got to work with some very important people, and I got great results, and they told other people. So by the time I was 19, just almost 20, I had become quite successful in external terms, at least, in the world. And some part of me was, you know, the mechanism in the back of our head, that 2 million-year-old brain, right? The fight or flight mechanism. I didn't know how to manage that so well. And part of my brain was like, well, maybe you have all this happening so quick because you're going to die young. And she came home crying uncontrollably. And Jay, I mean, she was like, what is it? What is it? My mom. And then my mom has cancer. And then even worse, they gave her 9 weeks to live. They just sent her home. And I think if it would have been me, I think my fear would have overcome me. But you know, most people will do more for people they love, whether it be their kids or their family or someone else, than they'll ever do for themselves. And so it's like I kicked into gear. That's what I do. It's like, okay, if there's a problem, there's a solution. I said, look, there's thousands of people that have stage 4 cancer and that are alive today. We're going to find out what they do. We're going to do the same thing. She's not going to die. And then I just read every book I could on cancer. And I came across this one book called One Answer to Cancer. It's not the book I'd recommend today because there's so many better ones today, but it was written by this dentist who had pancreatic cancer, which is the most vicious cancer of all. He was given 6 weeks to live, and this is 12 years later, and he's alive. And so he laid out what he did to cleanse his body, which sounded radical in those days, pancreatic enzymes. So I went to this woman, her name was Jenny. She was in her 40s. And I said, Jenny, you know you don't want to die. I said, but just going home and do nothing, why don't you read this book? This guy was in worse shape than you, and see if you wanted to apply this. And she read it, and she got inspired. And I gave her As a Man Thinketh to kind of work on her head a little bit. Anyway, long story short, within about 3 weeks, and you couldn't see anything 3 weeks later on her shoulder. And at the period of, I think, about 9 weeks when she was supposed to die, and she looked good, she had great energy, and I literally looked transformed. The doctor finally said, this is crazy, let's do exploratory surgery. So they went in her body, and all they could find left of the cancer was something the size of my pinky's fingernail. And so the doctor said, this is a miracle. She said, it is a miracle, but let me tell you what I did. And he was like, no, this is spontaneous remission. I don't want to hear what you did. What you did doesn't matter. But she's in her mid-80s today. She's still alive. And that shifted me from victimhood, like, oh my God, cancer could strike me down, to believing I'll be great. So all the more shocking.
A lot of the work you do is, why do we as humans often wait to see, not even see pain? You saw pain in someone else and you try to help solve it.
Yeah.
And that got you working.
Yeah.
But why is it that we often wait to experience pain before we decide to change a part of our lives, make a different choice, to create a shift? Why is it that we wait so often for stress and pressure?
I had that question was burning in me because, I was traveling around, had the privilege of this stage of life, traveling around the earth.
That's
and working
why,
with people from every walk of life, right? 100 plus countries I've worked in. And I'd see the same problems, even though you be in different cultures. Like, go to an Asian culture, it's not about the individual, it's about the group, right? But I'd still see the same problems. And then I got obsessed with it. Like, okay, what's the common human experience? Because I'm seeing the same problems, even though it's a different culture, even though it's different beliefs, right? And I began to realize that there's certain human needs. And there were 6 that I identified that I've used ever since, and it's helped me understand. And so one of those needs is certainty. And it's the base human need. Certainty that you can avoid pain and that you can be comfortable is the most basic need. It's a survival need, because if you have continuous pain, that's continuous damage. Continuous damage equals death, right? But what happens for people is, most people, that first basic need is where they live. They don't grow. Another need, the second need, is uncertainty. And a balance is not it. It's the ability to use both, enter both worlds. And then there's the need for significance, which is a big part of our culture today, thanks to social media. That need to feel special, unique, important, right? It can be a very positive emotion or need. It can be very negative depending upon how it's used, how it's directed. And then there's the need for connection and love, which everybody has. And those 4 needs, everybody finds a way to meet. Even if you have to lie to yourself, work 20-hour days, you're going to find certainty somehow. You're going to find variety. You're going to find some form of significance. Some people do it by tearing other people down. Some people do it by working harder. It's different. You're going to find some level of at least connection, if not love. But the final 2 are what make people feel alive, which is growing. Everything in the universe grows or dies. And contributing. Everything in the universe contributes or it's eventually eliminated by evolution. So those are the spiritual needs, growth and contribution, where you get beyond yourself. And I think that the majority of us don't take moves because of fear, and fear is just uncertainty. Mm-hmm. It's that base need. And when I go around and I describe this in more detail, and I work with a big audience, 15, 20,000 people, and I'll say, have them do a set of exercises and have them figure out where do they get, what triggers them to be certain or uncertain, what triggers them to have variety and so forth. So they understand that like everything I do is to meet these needs. So they have this route, like if I can be successful enough, then I'll be worthy of it. Mm-hmm. Or if I can just control it enough and know it's that way, but you can't control love, right? And so most people they're trying to meet their needs in a kind of a backwards way. Mm-hmm. And I think that fear, that uncertainty is what keeps most people from growing until they get enough pain. And then that pushes them through a threshold where their needs aren't being met, they gotta change. And unfortunately, most people wait till they have enough pain. Now, that's not my preference. Yeah, sure, it's not yours, but I'm sure you've had experiences as much as I've had where you did have to be pushed that far to get there, right?
Yeah. Usually we would say, oh yeah, the reason why we wait till we don't have to change is because we're comfortable and we're okay with it. But really, it's because you're saying these needs keep us trapped almost.
In fact, if you're wanting to change but not changing, it's because some of your needs are met by what you're doing and some of them aren't. Yeah. That's why you're in that push-pull, but you don't usually do enough until you're pushed over the edge. Like smoking a cigarette, what does it give people? Comfort. Because you take a breath of cigarette, you take a nice, slow, deep breath in and take it out, it calms the nervous system, right? It's something that they're comfortable with. It's variety. If they're all stressed out and then they start to breathe differently, it's variety in the body. For some people, they did originally for significance. I'm cool, I'm smoking. Right? Today, it's not really that cool to most people, but for some generations, some places it is. Some people see it as a connection with themselves. Mm-hmm. But if all of a sudden you're now in a relationship with somebody who doesn't smoke, and you really love them and you want their total love and attention, and they're completely disgusted by cigarettes, now my needs for love, right, are really strong, and my need for this comfort is really strong, and so you have this push-pull. Mm. And then some people make the shift, some people don't.
Yeah. You know? Absolutely. Well, you and I think we both connect on the fact that actually giving and service and contribution and making an impact are such big needs that I was just like, I don't want to stop though. Like just as you said with the energy point, I don't want to not be able to do as much and give more. Yeah. So how do I change my health? And that simple decision is what led me to be attracted to what you're doing in this book and the work in this area. Talk to us a bit about that energy piece. In the book, you talk a lot about boosting your energy through natural compounds.
Yes.
And when I was reading about this, I was fascinated because we're not hearing about this everywhere.
If somebody were to tell you 5 years ago that you could reverse aging, people would laugh at you. But today, there are billions and billions of dollars being spent by the richest people in the world, mostly in Silicon Valley, and some of the greatest scientists in the world. And there have been breakthroughs in the last 5 years that are amazing. So there's a man named Dr. Sinclair, David Sinclair from Harvard. He's probably the #1 longevity expert in the world, and I write about him in the book. And one thing is he's 53 chronologically, but he's 33 biochemically. I've applied what he's taught me for 6 months now, since I met him, 7 months, maybe 8 months now, and I'm 62, but I'm 51. My goal is to get it down to 41 or 42 if I possibly can. But you go, how's that possible? Well, there are ways of reversing, everybody knows their body's made of stem cells, I'm sure by now. And there's ways of reversing the process of a stem cell, literally from skin back to pluripotent. David Sinclair took his work, applied it to reversing the aging, and he started with mice. And he took these mice that had glaucoma, so they burned out the nerves in the eyes, and those don't regrow. And he's the first time, he'll probably win a Nobel Prize from this, he reversed the aging process and grew back their eyes so they have sight again, to give you an idea. They're using gene therapy. There's a young man that I interviewed in the book there who was on America's Got Talent, who's blind, who now can see by this gene therapies. These are the types of things that just sound like magic. The book is filled with things where I interviewed 150 of the smartest scientists, Nobel laureates, regenerative doctors and scientists to show you what's happening right now that you might think would happen 20 or 30 years from now. It sounds like magic. Or within 36 months. That's what it's all really based on. But here's what I want your audience to understand around energy. So everybody's heard of the genome or their DNA, right? You can think of the genome as being like the piano keys, but the music is played by a player, which is the epigenome. Epi means above. And the epigenome is affected by your diet, your exercise, how much exposure to radiation, etc. Well, most people have heard that. But the epigenome really is governed by 7 master genes that do 3 or 4 things that are critical. First, they turn on and off the different genes in your body. That's the epigenome. And if you turn on the wrong ones, you age too soon, or your energy drops. So when this is fully fueled, when those sirtuins are doing their job, everything happens in the right way. Second thing they do is they reduce your inflammation, which is the basis of most breakdown in the body. Third thing they do, which is critical, is they help your mitochondria, which is the energy force inside every cell in your body, convert food into energy, into ATP. It's pretty important. And then they have a separate task that is they clean up your DNA. So at 35 or 34, you've had a certain amount of exposure, more than when you were 20. Mm-hmm. When you're 50, it'll be even higher. At 60, even higher. Well, around 40, your stem cells drop off the cliff. Around 50, the sirtuins, the fuel of the sirtuins drops off the cliff. And that's called NAD, which I'm sure some of your people have heard about, you may have even spoken about. And you can do NAD as an IV. It doesn't absorb a lot, though. NAD, though, has a precursor called NMN, like Never Mother Never. I'm sure you've heard of it. And so I've known about that. And so, but I didn't understand that if you don't have enough NAD and NMN, then the body has to decide between, do I help the body turn on to epigenome? Do I help it reduce inflammation? Because there's only so much. Do I really help it create enough energy in the cell? Or do I clean up the DNA? But there's something coming on what your audience know about. No, shut up. I've talked about this a long time.
No, this is amazing. This is fascinating, yeah.
So there's a company called Microbiotech and Eden Rock, this merger of these 2 companies. They saw the power of NMN, and they said, if you could find an M&M that was stable and was even more absorbable, it would transform people. So, for example, in a mouse, they give NMN to mice and they live 30% longer. So not all mice studies transfer to humans. They take an old mouse, like a 70-year-old person would be like a 20-month-old mouse, okay? So that's an old mouse. And they put them on a treadmill, and the most they can run without collapsing is about 1/4 of a kilometer. A young dynamic mouse, like a 21-year-old, can run 4 times that, a full kilometer.
Wow.
14 days on NMN, and the old mouse, the 70-year-old mouse, will run 2 to 3 kilometers, 200 to 300% more. To go right before I publish the book, the Special Forces in Boston for 2 years has been doing a private study that's been top secret about using this new form of NMN that's called MIB 626. And it'll be available in 18 to 24 months.
Wow.
But it got out because the commander, they just finished the 2-year study. First year was safety, second year was efficacy. And the commander was debriefing his team and didn't realize there was a newspaper person in the room. So part of it got out. It was in the Daily Mail a couple weeks ago also. And they only know a part of it. And I can't tell you the things. I'm an investor in the company. I can't tell you what's not public, but I'll tell you what's public. What the commander said was, here's what I can tell you, gentlemen. What happens with mice happens with the most powerful men and women in the world, meaning the most conditioned men in the world saw massive increases in endurance just from taking this M&N, massive increase in muscle strength without any more stimulation, and most importantly, increased cognitive ability. So they're now doing studies on COVID with it. They're doing studies with groups of 40 to 60-year-olds that are just unconditioned, and they're seeing the same result. So in 18 to 24 months, the FDA will have, this will not be a nutraceutical. This will be something, go to your doctor, and imagine you get something that is natural, but you put it in your body, and now all 4 of those things I told you about are going full tilt. Now you're turned on and off the right genes. Now inflammation's coming down. You've got more energy at a cellular level, and your DNA is being cleaned up. So that's less than 2 years away from us right now.